from the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome to the podcast.
It is our 50th episode.
It's crazy to me.
Wow. Who thought we would make it here? You know? I mean, I hoped. I was really just hoping, let's make it to 20, and then 25 came, and now we're double. I mean, I can do math. We're at 50 now.
It's crazy.
And
it's crazy, your math skills.
I mean, I majored in math. I didn't really, but I graduated second grade. Moving on. We thought for our 50th episode, we would do a bigger director. And with a bigger director, maybe not one of their most well-known movies or most well-regarded movies.
Yeah.
And underrated.
But that director's James Cameron, and that movie we picked is The Abyss.
I've always loved The Abyss.
I've grown to appreciate this movie so much over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
While we've been watching and researching.
Have you gotten tired of watching it?
Not really, to be honest.
That's the thing. There's so much that happens in it, and it feels like there are so many acts in this movie, and it is just action packed, and the story's tight.
And it's strange because I remember when this came out, and this was one that I just kind of hadn't watched since probably like the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why in my head I thought this was like a really boring movie. And then, we picked it, and I was like, I hope we made the right choice. And the first viewing, like the first hour, I was like, man, this is like a really intense movie. Like,
yeah.
I don't know why I ever thought this was like slow or boring.
In one of my watches of this movie, one time I just watched it and just wrote down what were the intense scenes, and it was just like a page
So
of just
many.
intensity. I've loved this movie. I don't know if it was my mom or what, but it was it was always on HBO. So, and I had HBO as a kid, and yeah, this one was a fun one. And one of the main characters' names is Lindsay, and when you're a kid, how can you not,
And one of the main characters' names is Bud,
which is also my dad's name, and they're a divorced couple in the movie,
Yeah.
so it was a little weird.
Sure.
It's taken 30 years, but I'm okay with it now.
Well, I'm glad we picked this one. I like that we try our best. Obviously, most movies are well known. There's a lot of movies that we do that are cult type movies that are known, but this one I never really hear anybody ever like talk about The Abyss or like, oh man, one of my favorite movies, The Abyss. So
Yeah.
it seemed like appropriate for like, if we're gonna do Cameron, let's go for something that's not as is talked about or well regarded, like you said.
I think something that has such an ambiguous title is always going to either make someone super interested or just make someone brush it away.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, so much to talk about with The Abyss. We'll certainly talk about the technical aspects and how hard it was to film this movie. I mean, you could do a whole podcast just on talking about how insane it was for them to film this movie. If this is a movie that you haven't seen in a while, and after this episode you decide to watch The Abyss, it is definitely worth watching the making of documentary, because it will give you an appreciation for this film like no other, I guarantee.
Yeah. I can understand why at the time, and I mean, I don't know if this still holds true, but at the time and for many years after, this movie was considered the most difficult film that had ever been produced. And you can see why. I mean, just anything, any production is difficult, but take that production and make about 40% of that movie happen underwater. Yeah, that's a lot more difficult than you might imagine.
And way underwater, not just like...
yeah, way underwater. We're not just taking a little disposable camera and going 5 feet.
Yeah. But plenty to talk about with the production. We'll definitely talk about the differences between... and this is something I usually, it's like if there's a director's cut of something or an extended cut of something, generally I don't like that version, but there's a big difference between the two cuts of the director's cut or extended cut, if you want to call it. versus the theatrical. And so we'll talk about the differences with that and our opinions of those versions. Talk a little bit about Cameron, a little bit about the cast, some behind the scenes with the cast coinciding with the making of the movie, because
There's a lot that happened.
it was an intense shoot and a lot of intense things happened amongst the cast.
Some close calls. Let's see. And something that you might not realize, but there was some technology that was invented too for this movie, which went on to help a lot of other James Cameron movies. Wouldn't have happened without The Abyss.
So yeah, lots to talk about with The Abyss. We've also got our picks of the week. Mine is definitely Cameron related. He wrote and produced Strange Days, directed by Catherine Bigelow, which came out in 1995. So that's my pick of the week, and that was one I hadn't seen since it came out.
I haven't seen. Yeah, I easily have not seen that since it came out. I definitely remember the movie cover because I worked in a video store. I remember that cover very well. My pick of the week was also from the late 90s. It was a little movie you might have heard of called Anaconda.
I sort of just been like anticipating you doing this movie as a pick of the week at some point.
I mean, I guess it was only a matter of time. I mean, it's really just been a matter of time before I did a Jennifer Lopez movie.
I know your love of J-Lo.
I do love her as an actress.
Yeah.
It's true. And then, of course, we'll go to the Murray moment.
But before we get into our first clip from The Abyss, Lindsay, can you tell us just briefly what this movie's about? Such an ominous title.
The Abyss. So The Abyss is about members of an underwater oil rig who are enlisted to seek out and search through the remains of a sunken nuclear submarine. After handling technical and weather-related problems, along with some alternative mission-having team of Navy SEALs that come down to the depths to help them out, the civilian team encounters an unknown underwater alien species that's looking to make contact. Now, this isn't an alien movie per se, but we definitely have that element thrown into this in the latter half of the film. This is somewhat of a claustrophobic adventure that may run well over 2 hours, but there's never a dull moment in this movie.
Man, it's weird now that hearing you say the summary out loud. It's like if you take away the alien and underwater aspect, you've got like Armageddon.
Yeah, and I mean that's one thing we'll get to is there's definitely a Cold War feel to this movie that was just stripped right out of it.
Well, let's go to our first clip, then we'll come back. We'll get into The Abyss.
Here we go.
All right. Here. You put this on.
No, what are you doing? You don't listen.
Don't argue with me, goddammit. Just put it on.
Look, this is not an option, so just forget about
Lindsay,
it, all right?
shut up!
No.
Shut up! Put this thing on.
Be logical for one
Stop
second,
logic!
please. Listen. Just listen to me for 1 second. Now, you've got the suit on, and you're a much better swimmer than I am, right?
Yeah, maybe.
Right? Yes. So I've got a plan.
What's the plan?
I drowned, and you tow me back to the rig.
No.
Yes, this water.
No.
Only a couple of degrees above freezing. I go into deep hypothermia. My blood will go like ice water. Right? My body systems will slow down. They won't stop.
Vince.
You tow me back, and I can be revived after maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
Vince,
10
put this
15
on.
Minutes.
You put it
No,
on.
It's the only way. You just put this on. Put this on. You know I'm right. Please. It's the only way. You've got all the stuff on the rig to do this. Put this on. But please.
This is insane.
I know. Oh my God. I know.
You okay?
It's the only way.
Here, hold this. Hold on.
You can do this, you know. You can do this.
Oh, God, Liz.
I know. You can tell me later.
So like I was saying in the introduction, we could do an entire podcast on just the production of The Abyss. We're not going to do that. We're going to try to condense that down into hopefully 20 minutes or so.
Yeah.
I'll first start by saying James Cameron is known to be a perfectionist. He's known to push technology to the edge and beyond when it comes to filmmaking, and this was certainly one of those movies for sure. They basically did what had never been done before, and that's filming, like you said, 40% underwater. Not only that, having a closed and controlled environment. Most big movies, they want to shoot on a studio where things are controlled. There was no gigantic tank that was big enough to build an underwater set like they needed for The Abyss, so they had to go and search that out.
Yeah, and there were two primary tanks. It was they were called A and B tank, and in total it was 11 million gallons of water to fill these giant tanks, and they were all part of this converted nuclear power plant in South Carolina. The smaller tank, B tank, was what they thought that they were going to use, and then A tank was something that it was so mammoth that it wasn't even a thought that they were going to use this. And then James Cameron's like, you know what? Actually, that one. And if you think about it, like, if you want to film as much as they want to film underwater, the ocean or any uncontrollable natural atmosphere is going to be, it's going to take so much more time, and there's going to be so many more things that cause problems.
Yeah, and just filling the tank, they said it took 5 days, and they had to they sourced the water from a lake, and then had to filter it. There was a filtration system somewhat, but they basically, like, this wasn't a working nuclear power plant. This was like they converted abandoned. It was abandoned. So they had engineers working around the clock to kind of like working on the set while they're filling this tank. And
they were filling the water while building the set, because I mean, time is money. You got to keep going.
It's just it's crazy. And then just to think that this entire film was shot so far away from Hollywood. And I think in the documentary we watched, like, James Cameron was saying, like, eventually the studio was like questioning certain things because they were like, why do they need second sets of scuba gear? And it was because the all the chlorine that they were putting in the water was likely burning holes into the suits that they were using.
And they had, they put chlorine into the water initially, and about a week in, everything started getting murky and gross, and you couldn't, filming was just pointless. So yeah, they doused it in chlorine, and people, not the actors because they had helmets on, but the crew was having their hair bleached, losing body hair, getting chemical burns, and having their suits eaten through because there was so much. I mean, I can't even think about what long-term damage that might have caused.
And you think about just actors taking on roles. Me personally, I'm not an actor, but I'm also have a tremendous fear of being out in water or being in deep water. And I can't imagine you get hired for a job and they're like, you're going to train for 2 weeks to be underwater and then
look like what you're doing.
Right. Too. Yeah. Look like this is what you've been doing for 20 years.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have to have all this gear on. You're underwater. You're and then you're going to have to act and move around, and every step of the way. This movie was rough on the actors. I believe Michael Biehn said that he was there for 5 months and he only actually worked for 5 weeks. And I think I read that they never completed one scene an entire day, just because they could only film for so much, because their movements and everything they did just took so long because they're underwater.
And the other thing too was that they had to, along with these special suits that were created for this film, they also invented a communication system that made it possible for James Cameron to talk to the actors and talk to the rest of the crew, but it was a one-way thing. So if people needed to talk back to him, it was through hand motions, it was through communication, it was acting it out, because that's all you can do. And so things are going to take a little bit longer. So just imagine all of these scenes having to be so perfectly plotted out and communicated, and not only with humans, but also with all of these devices that were also created for the movie that have to go from point A to point B and operated by people that aren't the actors. It's just everything has to be on point.
And then also lighting underwater, making things look like it's the deep dark ocean, because this is different from making it look like they're in a swimming pool or I mean, it has to look like they're as deep as you can go in the ocean. And for long amounts of time. I think the actors were underwater for like 6 to 8 hours during the day.
Sometimes even longer. And
Cameron himself was underwater for like 12 hours, or he'd have to decompress for like 2 hours.
Yeah. And they're going down like 20, 30, 50 feet, like that's no joke.
Making a movie is extraordinarily hard. Making a movie where you're mostly filming underwater, I can't even imagine. Underwater movies in general, most of them have been pretty bad. 3 of them came out in 1989.
We'll get there, yeah.
But you look at The Abyss and like this movie is like on another level technically.
In some movies, when you look at them, the underwater movies, you can tell if you're really paying attention that they're not actually underwater. And that's not to say that there aren't parts in The Abyss. It's mainly without the actors. That there are scenes that are filmed not in water and that are made to look like that via, smoke, lighting, mirrors, that sort of thing. But with the underwater scenes, it's kind of nutty how they made it look like this in this controlled environment. And yes, lighting, electricity underwater, what? But they, not only did they obviously paint or like spray the tank all black, but also there was a tarp for about a month. There was a tarp that covered this whole thing until
the small tank. And then for the small tank, and then they had beads for the bigger tank, right?
Yeah, these really, really
black beads,
thick layer of I think it was something like polypropyl beads. Something they made it
that floated on the top of the surface, so that blacked it out, so that it looked like a dark.
Yeah.
Dark.
But you can't put like plastic on top of that because if people have to come up out of the water
if there's
safely.
An emergency, yeah.
Yeah. So this is just completely blacked out. Just, I don't know. I love thinking about, that environment and being controlled. And in some ways it feels safe. But at the same time, it's also like these aren't just props that they're wearing. And this is all very real. They're really underwater. They're really, you could lose your life with just one accident.
Yeah. And it's crazy to me too that this far into technology, like in the movie, they're using that liquid that they can breathe, and it's like it hadn't been used for humans, but they had tested it on animals, and like this is like a real thing that exists. And like in the movie, when they're using those rats, that was real. That wasn't like fake.
That was actually the
that
actual
was the actual
fluid,
fluid, and that rat was actually like breathing that fluid.
I think Cameron said they
pretty
did
freaky.
Yeah. They did it like on five different rats. Cameron said, we gave them penicillin injections or a veterinarian gave them penicillin injections just in case there was some type of, respiratory infection that would happen after the fact. That's not to say that people weren't upset about the fact that that this was used on animals in the film, but all of those rats were completely fine, but they really did breathe that friggin' special fluid. It's crazy.
Which is freaky.
Yes.
The movie is a technical marvel. I know that the movie, this is all just like kind of reading in retrospect. The movie got a lot of flack, and I think gets a lot of flack because it goes from this sort of like underwater adventure movie into like this like alien thing. I get that, but the special effects of the aliens and that water effect that they do when you're watching this 1989, most effects movies that were digital from like 89 to 90, really like 98.
Yeah.
You go back and watch those movies now and you're like, oof.
Those are rough.
Yeah. But the Cameron movies are not. You watch The Abyss and Terminator 2 and Titanic and you're like, man, this stuff holds up pretty good now. Mind-blowing for 1989.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, and it was invented for this film. Cameron had a vision, and it was, I want to have this, I don't even want to say creature. It's just controlled water. Looks like it comes up.
Yeah.
Comes up and can shapeshift, imitate someone's face, and that was a whole, invention too for this movie, digitizing someone's face to then be made into this water effect.
And it's so weird because it's like clearly he uses in Terminator 2, like, a few years later. But
yeah, it is totally fun to watch The Abyss and then see Terminator, and you're like, that's where that came from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and too, same thing with Titanic. There's a lot of scenes where they're flooding because they had the set where they could drain the water out of it and then reflood it, because there's several scenes in the movie.
Yeah,
there's several scenes in the movie where parts of the ship are flooding and the actors are trying to get out, and that was real. They like really flooded it, and Cameron did that when he went on to do Titanic, like had a set that they could resubmerge in water and empty out. And so, yeah, it's like someone who's like, you know, a visionary who's like technically pushing boundaries and then following up on them and using them for further movies. And probably, I'm sure the dozens of movies that used, you know, followed in his footsteps for their own productions.
That's one of the things that I like the most about this film is whether it is the limited time that we spend above the water. There really is no part where this movie takes place on land. It's either above water for a short amount of time or completely underwater. But everything that happens, these actors are really experiencing it. It might be a built set or a built ship, but they're experiencing all of it. And I think it really shows on how grueling of a production it was for the actors and for the crew. Even at the end of the film, when everyone's so haggard and, you know, the ship is brought up to the top of the water and everyone looks haggard, and I can't help but feel like that's just how everyone like felt.
Yeah, there's
the movie.
There's a particular scene where like Ed Harris is like, he comes out of the water into their bigger ship that they have. And
I mean the fight scene?
Is it after that where he's like cold and he's like sitting there? Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm sorry.
Like his eyes look puffy.
There's like a scene where it's like after the fight scene where Ed Harris is sitting there and he's like kind of cold and I remember in like the documentary he was just like I didn't have to really act that hard. I was just sort of like this like miserable sap at this point, just like kind of like beaten down.
And you know, we probably should talk about a few close calls or a few like hardships that the cast did go through. One being that Ed Harris almost drowned. That was kind of a big deal. Someone went to hand him air and gave him the respirator upside down. So half water, half air goes into his lungs, and then they flush it out, thinks that it's going to be fine, and does it again. And that was a moment when, you know, he really thought this could be it, and they couldn't keep filming the scene after that.
He said he like later that night was like in his car like driving home and like or to the hotel or wherever he was going, like kind of broke down sobbing, not because he almost died, but because he couldn't finish the scene because of what happened. I'm just like, what a maniac.
He like couldn't finish the scene, but also like, I mean, I think
those are the kind of actors that James Cameron needs, like a maniac who's like, yeah, I almost died, and then I was upset with myself because I couldn't finish the scene for the day.
And it was like he was upset that he almost died too. It was like, I shouldn't even care that I almost died. I shouldn't have even gotten to that point. And I think for me it's like I said before, this movie is full of nonstop intense scenes. And Justin, you and I have talked about the scene where the character of Lindsay, played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, decides to drown. She willingly drowns go into a hypothermic state to where the idea behind it is that her body temperature slows down, but it doesn't technically. Yeah. She doesn't technically.
When she lets out that first scream from the cold water, it's like, I mean, again, and that's like just a tiny intense scene of a million intense scenes.
Yeah, and just it might be the one that makes my entire body like quiver a little bit is watching someone willingly drown, you know, for like the supposedly something that might maybe that might work.
Yeah.
So the scene where that happens and Ed Harris is dragging her back to the ship, like swimming back to the ship. That scene, she really doesn't have any type of breathing apparatus on that. So in that scene being acted out, it was done a few times. And yeah, she got air before that, but then he's really dragging her underwater. And then the next scene, she looks like a goner and they're trying to resuscitate her, with the paddles, with mouth to mouth. And it's just not working. That scene for me, I know you and I have talked about it, and you said you felt like it goes on a little long.
I think it loses a little bit of its dramatic sense. Yeah.
God, I think it doesn't.
That's me personally.
I feel like it goes on a long time, but for me, that's where you see the love there that Bud's like, I'm not letting her go.
Yeah. It's a very like movie magic moment. You know
it is very movie magic, yes. Yeah. So this scene looks incredibly painful. And it was really painful. It's painful to watch. And so they're doing this over and over and over again. And Cameron, being the perfectionist.
And that's where, like, he's, like, banging on her chest. Ed Harris is, like,
Yeah.
trying to get her.
And she looks cold. She's wet. At this point, you know, like, in order for defibrillators to work, you know, you have to have bare skin. So she's, you know, she's exposed. The scene is just very hard to watch. And they're doing it over again and over again. And then the camera runs out of film. And with that, Cameron's like, okay, reload. Let's keep doing this. And at that point, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio is just like, I've had it. We are not animals. I'm done doing this scene. And storms off the set. And everyone's kind of speechless because I think, you know, you watch this and you're like, yeah, I would be done with this scene too. I'm done. So the rest of that scene, it's kind of ingenious and really smart how Cameron made up for that.
It's like from her point of view. The camera is her.
Yeah. So just like, I don't know. Like we were saying, intense scenes. This movie's chocked full of them.
And that's where I feel like James Cameron, you know, he's like an old school troubleshooting director who's like, our star just walked off set and he's like, we'll shoot her as a POV. You know, it's like, forget her for the day, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, like we were saying, some of the actors had really intense moments on this film. And James Cameron's intensity is something that is known, and he's constantly raising the bar. But at the same time, I don't think that there were ever like any complaints that he was abusive in any way. But he's definitely not going to be a guy that's going to tell you to do something that he wouldn't do himself. And so I think his expectations are very high, and his bedside manner might not be the best. And he might come across a little uncaring, but he's looking to get it done and to get it done well. It just might be cold.
And I know Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio has always been quiet about, she's never done interviews about The Abyss, and to this day, like, won't speak of it. She's kind of like disowned the movie. So
it says a lot, doesn't
it?
it?
Yeah. It's like, you know, and Cameron's been known to be like, you know, a pretty big prick. To actors, and I don't think so much to crew, but definitely pushing actors beyond their comfort zones.
And even Ed Harris, he did the documentary, and he doesn't really care to talk about the making of this film. I don't think anyone regrets, or at least no one's really vocalized regretting doing the movie. But pretty much everyone except Michael Biehn.
Yeah, that guy's just like a
Michael
happy.
Bihn's like, it was cool, man.
Yeah.
I had a great time.
He's like, oh, it was awesome. But I mean, and he works with Cameron quite a bit, so he's like probably, you know, just one of those people.
What's the problem? He like slaps you in the face a little bit. What's wrong with that?
Like, hey, I'm as crazy as he is. Well, let's wrap up here talking about the tech talk of the movie. We'll go to another clip, and then we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about Cameron, the script, the actors, and stuff that's not so much on the making of the movie.
It took him 30 minutes just to get down there.
Bud, do you hear me? You drop your weights and start back now, Bud. That gauge could be wrong. Do you hear me? Just drop your weights and start back now. Your gauge could be wrong. Your gauge could be wrong. You drop your weights and start back now. No, you won't stay there. Do you hear me? You drop your weights. You can breathe shallow. Do you hear me? But please, listen to me, please. God damn it, you drive me back with a bottomless pit. You can't leave me here alone now, please. Oh, God, Virgil, please. Please.
Okay, that's my Ed Harris impression.
That's pretty good.
Thank you.
The sound effects in this movie like put me on edge.
Yeah, there's a lot to be on edge about in this movie.
But rewatching this movie, God, I love Ed Harris. It kind of like made me want to go on like an Ed Harris, just like binge watch.
I never really think of him as like an action guy ever, but I like so many movies that he's in. But the scene where he and Coffee, played by Michael Biehn, Man, that fight scene, that is one of my favorites. And it goes from like sneaky and like tension building to like immediate like 1,000% tension.
To me,
so good.
To me, Ed Harris is like, for like 1989 was like a modern day Robert Duvall.
That's a good comparison. It's a very kind comparison.
Just like sort of this like sensitive yet rugged character.
Yeah. He's got a great jaw. Mm-hmm. Man, I can't stop looking at his jaw in this movie. It's so good.
Nice eyes.
He's easy on the eyes.
Yeah.
And nice eyes. Kind eyes.
Yeah. Kind eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I never used to look at people's eyes until like we were like 5 episodes in, and then you were like, you know about Arnold Schwarzenegger, what I find really fascinating? I like to look at his eyes, and now like every time I watch an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, I'm just like, why am I looking at this guy's eyes? Oh yeah, Lindsay burned it into my brain.
There's one thing I'm known for. It's really taking in men's eyes specifically. It's really what I pay attention to. Can you just get me like an up close, like
Lindsay's
8 by 10?
I don't like straight guys, but I like straight eyes.
God, you know me so well. Ugh. So Ed Harris, he has great eyes, amazing bone structure.
Interesting bone structure.
He's so stellar in this movie, and definitely not to be outdone. But Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio plays Lindsay, who is his soon-to-be divorced wife. I love her character in this movie, but if you watch it, you know from pretty much at any point in the movie, from moment one she enters the picture, people are calling her a bitch left and right, or just like, oh, be careful of that one, she's gonna stick it to you. And I can't help but feel like James Cameron did this deliberately. So many of his movies have a strong female character. And not that I think he's trying to take some type of feminist stance, of not saying that at all, but specifically for The Abyss, there are 2 female characters in this film, and this is a very, very male-dominated job field. And I feel like he is trying to make that known, at least that this is the experience of what it's like to be a woman who is very commanding, knows what she wants, smart, on top of it, and not afraid of anyone, and how she's treated by the surrounding atmosphere, very, very male atmosphere around her.
What I do think is interesting in the script that Cameron does is that when she's giving Michael Biehn orders, he does this sort of like, like he like rolls his eyes, and all she is like saying something that like is like very pertinent to like their situation, and she's saying it in the most calmest manner, like she's not ordering anybody around. But then like a mere like 25 minutes later, he's just like barking orders at everybody. And then when Ed Harris is like, you know, like maybe like just chill out a little bit, my crew's not used to this, you know, like let's like ease in this thing. He's like, I don't give a crap about anybody. It's like, it's fine for him to, you know, but I do think with that scene, Cameron realizes the situation of like the male dominated atmosphere and how the guys are being pretty sexist toward the Lindsay character. And I think that scene where Michael Biehn is ordering the guys around, it's like in the script he's kind of showing the hypocrisy of this whole situation, of that it's fine for him to do it, but you know, the minute that she takes charge, it's like, oh, woman's gonna say something.
And what's funny is that she doesn't even have to do anything except be obviously physically a woman. Like in that thing where he like makes fun of her for a second, he refers to her as Mrs. Brigman, meaning that Ed Harris's last name, they're getting a divorce, and she goes, don't call me that. Like not even in a like crappy way. She just goes, just don't call me that. And he goes, what would you like us to call you, sir? Like, come on, dude. And then, like, 2 beats later, he's being a total dick to everyone.
The movie starts out, we were like, oh, this is like a real sexist movie. But then, like, you kind of like...
You realize that there's a point to this.
Yeah. And Cameron, I think, is like smart enough to know. And I mean, most of his movies are female-driven.
It is strange to me. And I hadn't really thought of that until really looking closely at The Abyss and then thinking about other movies that Cameron's done. Yeah, well, he loves his strong female characters.
Even Titanic.
Yeah. Let's see. With the cast, we've already talked about Michael Biehn. He's in many James Cameron films. He is a solid villain for this Lieutenant Coffee character.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's intended to be a villain, but what happens to his character just kind of it just happens.
Yeah, it's kind of going crazy. You know, he's got the
Pressure sickness.
Pressure sickness. And it's interesting to me, like you kind of see his range because I think he plays such a great sort of like crazy villain character in this. And it's, you know, in James Cameron's Terminator, he's such like this
Chill.
sensitive, chill
Yeah.
character.
Yeah.
And, you know, smooth talking.
Mm-hmm.
But then one of my favorite roles of his is Tombstone. I think he plays like
You do love
like
Tombstone, don't you?
I love that movie, and I think he plays a great cocky, you know, villainous character.
And rounding out the rest of this cast, this really is an ensemble movie. And I know we've only really focused on 3 of the main folks in this movie, but this is such an ensemble film. Kim Scott, who's One Night, she's probably in there as one of my favorite characters. J.C. Quinn throws in a solid performance. Had a lot of trouble in the underwater filming scenes. You wouldn't know that by the film.
I'll just say that guy too has the most amazing IMDb picture page. It's like he just got like
Yeah.
bleeding eyeballs for his like main photo.
Yeah, that's right. Kid Brewer, who actually passed away year after The Abyss was released. Yeah, R.I.P. He had a really good mustache in that movie. John Lloyd, Todd Graff, who plays Hippie, who's got you gotta love Hippie in this movie. He's got that rat with him. He loves that rat. And man, that would be me. That'd be me making sure that my pet is safe and making sure my rat doesn't drown, throwing it in a Ziploc bag. You know, that's you and I, Justin, really.
Yeah.
And then probably a little lovable. I love that catfish, Leo Burmester. He's a good character in this movie too. Another good mustache. A lot of good mustaches in The Abyss. Even Michael Biehn, great mustache. Another great set of eyes on that one too.
Yeah, now next time I watch this, that's all I'll be looking for, the mustaches.
Get all the male mustaches and eyes. Yeah, the cast is solid in this movie, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't just mention that, first, like, the story of The Abyss has been around in James Cameron's subconscious for a long time, but didn't really become a completed script until 1987, and Gale Ann Hurd, who had been with James Cameron for a little bit, became the producer on the film, and they got married before The Abyss started production, and then they separated during the first pre-production and divorced in February of 1989, and The Abyss was released in 1989. So they had gone through obviously a tumultuous relationship during the production of this very intense film, had both stayed true to it, and the character of Gale Ann Hurd, isn't exactly the character of Lindsay in this film, but it is kind of like based on her, one would say. Not that James Cameron is necessarily Ed Harris, but there's a little bit of obviousness in there. And I think that's pretty interesting to note, a couple going through a divorce in this film. That's what's happening in real life.
To me, it feels like Cameron's most personal film, and probably, I think, one of his better scripts too.
Yeah, agreed.
So let's kick over to sort of our final topic here for the Abyss discussion. So there's 2 versions of this movie that are available now. There's the theatrical version.
Now that's what I grew up with.
Me too. And then there's an extended cut. To me, extended cuts, director's cuts have always been sort of like, this was my vision or whatever. And then you watch and you're just like, yeah, I can see why they cut all this stuff out.
Yeah. Sometimes it works, or you're like, oh, that thing could be left in, sure. But this version, I don't know. What do you think, Justin?
I'm going to say, I feel like the extended cut of The Abyss is better than the theatrical.
Me too.
And part of it is due to the fact that James Cameron was under the gun. The studio said, you have to stop. Like the post-production went on for ever.
It was over a year.
Yeah.
Over a year post-production.
And they basically said, you have to stop. And there were some digital effects that were part of the extended, that you see in the extended cut, that he wasn't as happy with. So he was fine, like, I'm just going to cut out this entire scene. And he also cut out this entire subplot, which when you take that away, you know, a lot of people complain about The Abyss, kind of the ending being lackluster and not really,
or just like
making a whole lot of sense.
It just changes because you go from this like super like intense claustrophobic atmosphere, and then you're like, what? Aliens? What's going on?
And that scene, the stuff with aliens is like kind of short.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the extended cut, a lot more is explained. Like the alien, you know, there's this whole like Cold War backdrop happening. The aliens had seen how the world had just sort of like been at war with each other, and that's, you know, and they were going to destroy the world with this big wave that was going to like crash down on everybody.
Giant tidal wave, like 10,000 foot tidal wave.
And we see all this in the extended cut whenever Ed Harris is talking to the aliens, and he says, you could have killed everybody. You know, why didn't you do it? And that's when we see what's in the theatrical version of them showing his replay of his text to Lindsay saying, you know, I knew this was a one-way ticket, and him sacrificing himself. And they're seeing some, you know, there is humanity. And it's almost like that moment of like, you know, when you say like, oh, I'm so just, the world is terrible, people are terrible. And then you see this one little grain of humanity in somebody, and it kind of like changes things for you. And it's like, it's just an insinuation of that's what it did for these aliens. They're like, we were just going to destroy the world, but because it just seems like you people hate each other. But, you know, we saw this act of kindness and humanity and humility, and we decided we're not going to make this wave like crash down on everyone. And
it should be said too that with the whole reason that Ed Harris's character goes on this mission that's like 20,000 leagues under the sea, the deepest anyone has ever gone, is to retrieve this warhead. And since these aliens have been able to monitor our news, know what's going on, they see that this man sacrifices his life despite leaving leaving people behind in order to basically save the world. And this is why they decide not to do that. So this whole Cold War idea was so much more of a story, and we get a little bit of it in the theatrical release, but it makes so much more sense. And it's not to say that we don't see the aliens until the very end of the movie. We get enough sprinkling of that midway through the film, but it isn't until boom at the end that Ed Harris is decided he's just gonna he's gonna disarm this warhead at the bottom of the ocean, and he doesn't have enough air to get back up. He's just gonna chill and die. So it is understood by the end of the theatrical version that because of Ed Harris's care for the people up above, the fact that he goes down to presumably, you know, save humanity or stop this warhead from being active, it is somewhat inferred that that's what the aliens, why they emerge at the end of the film. So what they do is they bring their entire colony, it's really cool. This entire colony just like raises up from the bottom of the ocean and surfaces. And it is a really cool, beautiful, like hopeful, but you don't really know why ending. And I never really questioned it because it wasn't anything that I thought of before other than being kind of out of left field, but kind of nice and positive, but I didn't really know why. The extended version, you're just like, oh, this clicks, that clicks. Now it makes so much more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the extended version it doesn't make the alien sequence at the end of the movie seem so arbitrary.
Yes, exactly. And there's a lot more that was cut out as far as the Bud and Lindsay relationship. I'm fine with that being cut out. I kind of like not knowing more of their backstory, a little bit more of Michael Bihn's character being a dick, and you know, some other crew scenes. Though fine, sure, yeah. I would have been fine with that being cut out. But man, the whole Cold War complete apocalypse thing, like that would have been really cool to keep in.
And I'm assuming there's been we'll kind of close on this. We got to get to our picks of the week, but you know, they've been talking about a Blu-ray 4K version of this movie coming out for like 3 years, and I can only imagine that it's because we're going to get this awesome version of the extended cut where they really finessed anything that Cameron like wanted perfect.
Yeah, because after this was released in 89, and then Cameron went on and did Terminator 2. He made a lot of money from that, and then put money from that back into finishing The Abyss. So, I mean, that's got to say something that you cared about that movie quite a bit.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's like, if you think of all the movies that are on Blu-ray, the fact that that you can only get The Abyss on DVD still is pretty nuts.
I think it's one of his most underrated films, and I've racked my brain trying to figure out why, and the only reason I can come up with is that I feel like it's not as sexist moments, intentionally sexist moments as there are in the film, and for it being pretty much an all-male cast except for 2 women, it's not that bro-y of a movie compared to a lot of things. It's not really souped up or pumped up. It's very much an action film.
And I feel like Cameron can get pretty hokey in the scripts, and I feel like rides the edges of hokiness in this movie, but never quite goes over like he does in like his later films.
There's a little bit more romanticism in this movie too,
but it works. I think it totally works, and it's totally believable.
But I feel like that is one of the things that worked against this movie, because when it came out, it's not like it was panned. It's not like it wasn't well received. It just didn't.
Yeah, and I just don't think people could appreciate it for what it was and like what they attempted. But this is worth a revisit of, you know, and I say this about every movie we do, but I honestly feel like this movie deserves some like renewed attention.
Whether it's the 2 hour and 20-minute version or the 2 hour and 50-minute version, like I haven't gotten sick of watching this movie one time, and I've watched it so many times recently.
I agree. Yeah. Well, let's stop there. We'll come back for some final thoughts on The Abyss, but we need to get into our picks of the week. So, Lindsay, your pick of the week was Anaconda.
It sure was.
I'm excited. I'm excited for this. I haven't seen Anaconda in a while, and this is one I'm definitely gonna revisit after you tell me about it.
Yeah, I hope so. I need to watch Strange Days. I can't wait to go back to that one too.
What can you tell me about Anaconda?
Okay, so maybe this movie is too fresh and gross too much money, but there's some part of me that thinks that Anaconda will turn into a cult movie, or at least a guilty pleasure type movie for a lot of people. First off, this is not a poorly made film. On top of a beautiful landscape set off the Amazon River in Brazil, it's just a ridiculously fun monster movie. So Anaconda starts out like any other adventure movie, a mysterious, kind of scary beginning where we open on actor Danny Trejo, alone and terrified, climbing to the top of his boat in the middle of nowhere, frightened of something attacking his boat from underneath, enough to commit suicide. And if it weren't for the title of this movie, it may be more of a mystery. The character setups follow all of the folks who make up this documentary film crew setting out on the Amazon in search of the elusive people of the mist type of tribe. First day out, they come across a stranded man looking for a ride up the river. Now, if Texas Chainsaw Massacre taught us anything, it was to definitely not ever pick up a hitchhiker. And especially when you pick up on the river, I mean, there's a story behind that. There has to be. This interloper happens to be a snake trapper with an alternative agenda of tracking down a giant anaconda. He seizes every opportunity to become indispensable to the film crew and basically takes over the boat. Throw in some anaconda attacks along the way. We get our first sighting around minute 15, and you've got yourself a fairly tense, not rocket science, entertaining movie. Aside from using practical and digital special effects to create these giant anacondas, the other most standout aspect of this movie is most certainly the cast. If it weren't for the intense side-eyeing or snappy sarcasm, comically constant machismo, and the cast's complete dedication to taking this all so seriously, Anaconda would totally be a fail. And if you know me, as we've already talked about, you know I love Jennifer Lopez in movies. Her willingness to commit to a role, comic timing, just being kind of a decent actor. I don't know what it is, but her in a monster movie, her in a scary movie, give me it any day. Ice Cube is next in line for my favorite in this movie. He's really the only dude who isn't trying to prove something, and along with Lopez is the most real of the entire bunch. There's at least 2 stealthy references to his music career too, which is kind of funny if you catch them. Definitely not to be forgotten is Jon Voight's performance as the snake trapper, boat hijacker, ruthless villain who is so obviously the bad guy from moment one. And if you've seen Anaconda, maybe you remember Voight's pretty terrible impression of a Spanish accent. I mean, I think it's a Spanish accent anyway, a factor that only adds to the campiness of this movie. I love the accent. I love that I don't know totally where it's from, but I can just maybe guess. And the moment that he's regurgitated by the giant 40-foot anaconda and winks at Jennifer Lopez, I mean, come on. This movie is so ridiculous. Even that moment is like a silly wink to the audience that says, hey, don't take this so seriously, even though we're completely taking this movie seriously. Not to be forgotten are Owen Wilson, Eric Stoltz, Carrie Warher, and Jonathan Hyde. These guys didn't have a lot to work with for their characters, but it doesn't really matter because they all serve their purpose and give totally fine performances. And you know, a movie about a giant man-eating, hunting, killing snake is a horror movie, right? It has all the tropes. We're violating sacred spaces, a mysterious stranger. There's plenty of POV shots of the killer snake, the sexy girl who ends up being the final girl. But where's like the boobs? Where's the sex? This, is a horror movie, right? You're not going to find any of that in Anaconda, and that might be a letdown for some, but I kind of admire it for that. While Lopez is technically the final girl, she does survive alongside Ice Cube, meaning the two people of color survive this giant snake ordeal. And for a PG-13 late 90s horror movie, Anaconda did something that no one else was doing. And I hadn't really thought of that until watching it this time around. And in a sea of WB actors in the late 90s, a movie that comes along where all the white people die and there's no nudity, totally unheard of. Okay, technically, white guy Eric Stoltz survives, but he's such a non-character through most of the movie because he's like incapacitated. That's kind of a cool scene too, but he can't talk, he's bedridden, he misses everything that's snake related, he doesn't really count. As for the special effects, I think it's a crafty mixture of practical and digital. Like the digital effects have advanced a lot in the last 23 years, and some of the effects don't look that great now, but at the time they look kind of dope as hell. The animatronic anaconda, though, dude, I believe that thing. It looks totally real. The practical effects hold up way better than the digital. The digital stuff is kind of laughable. There's absolutely 0 point in looking at this movie for any factual information about real anacondas in Brazil. If you want actual science and anaconda facts, watch a fascinating documentary on those topics. These anacondas defy gravity for entertainment purposes only, not to educate. I'll always think it's kind of like a waste of time to make sense of a movie like this. It's just meant to be fun. And Anaconda isn't like reinventing the wheel with scares, and it does have some laughable moments. But man, if you're looking for a no-brainer, you just want to couch it on a Sunday afternoon, Anaconda is a pretty decent, funny, and just entertaining movie to revisit.
I totally forgot about that regurgitation scene until you just now mentioned it.
It's even better than like the Freddy wink at the end of Freddy versus Jason. I don't like that wink. I like the Jon Voight wink.
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna rewatch this as a double feature with Lake Placid or Snakes on a Plane.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think that it would probably get paired with Snakes on a Plane. I like Anaconda more than that one.
I do too. Yeah. Even though I haven't seen it, I remember feeling. I feel like I'm gonna be more into this.
It would go so well with Lake Placid. That's a guilty pleasure of mine.
I really like Lake Placid a lot. Me too.
I really want to hear about Strange Days. I remember about 5% of this movie.
Yeah, to be honest, I remembered less than 5%. Like, I think I saw this and I just hated it when it came out, and I think that was like the consensus of most audience members when this film came out in 1995. Was almost kind of threw Catherine Bigelow's career out the window, and was a pretty big disappointment for the studios that were funding Cameron. Cameron wrote this, or Cameron, I don't know if the script was written, but he had the idea of this movie. He conceived it of about 10 years prior to its making. But Catherine Bigelow got really interested in the movie because the movie really plays a lot on racism and corruption, and that was going on in Los Angeles in the early 90s with LA riots and police brutality. And so that's what drew her to the movie. It's kind of wild when you watch a movie now because aside from some of the technology that was supposed to be futuristic at the time, looking very 90s, the movie actually like plays like really relevant now. I'm going to make this short because it's a neo-noir. There's a lot of twists and turns, and there's so much corruption and kind of mystery going on. It would really be hard to like detail the movie without giving away a lot of plot points. And because this is a film that I feel like a lot of people haven't seen, I feel like you should kind of go into it a little bit blind. But to put the plot simply, it takes place just a few days before the cusp of the next millennium. Ralph Fiennes plays an ex-cop who now is in the black market, and he sells these recordings where people can put this device on their head and they can experience not only the sensation, they're visually seeing the images of something that's like a memory, but they can also feel the sensation. Some of them are as cheap and silly as a woman taking a shower, like a man can experience what that's like. But there's also some dark ones where there's like a bank robbery, and some people commit crimes so that they can sell the recordings on the black market. Eventually it becomes wrapped up in a murder mystery, and sort of like gets into one of these recordings is basically almost like a snuff film. As Ralph Fiennes goes deeper into this mysterious recording that he has, he gets a lot of help from his friend who has a more legitimate job. She works as a limo driver and security personnel, played by Angela Bassett. I don't really know that I know a lot of movies with Ralph Fiennes, and this movie in particular, his character, he plays it so well. Like I can't really picture like anybody else portraying this character because it's comedic / serious role. I don't know. It's a very fine line. There's a lot of twists and turns, but they team up. They try to help solve this mystery. We find out that there's a lot of police corruption. There's a lot of people in power that are getting away with things, and it really within like the entertainment industry. And like I said, this movie cannot play more relevant now than it did in 1995. I feel like maybe it was kind of lost on people, but now because corruption and everything is like so much more in the media, information travels faster. This movie, I think like I think it's like very enjoyable. I think it was misunderstood when it came out because people were just like, oh, it's so dark, it's so graphic, it's so violent. But when you watch it now, you kind of see that it was trying to make a point. If you put aside some of the lack in it not seeming futuristic anymore, if you can put that aside, I think it's like a very enjoyable film. If you're into like the crime drama noir film genres, this is one that I think is really worth going back and checking out. It's a movie that is as well as the same thing with Cameron's Abyss and True Lies, is not on Blu-ray, but I hear it's in the works, but I was able to pick up a DVD of it for like $4 at the Goodwill. So, and you can get it on eBay. I don't think it's streaming anywhere. I haven't checked Amazon though. But Strange Days, written by Cameron, directed by Catherine Bigelow, who I'm a big fan of. A really fine film, a really smart movie, really, to me, taps into the true meaning of like science fiction genre filmmaking. I highly recommend it.
Definitely made me want to revisit it. Anything Angela Bassett's in, I'm always a fan of, because that woman can, she can do anything. It has been so long since I've seen this. The visuals of it remind me, but I just don't.
And I'll make mention, Juliette Lewis plays a small role, but she was cast in this because she could really sing, and she plays lead singer of a band and she has at least one performance in the movie. And if you like Juliette Lewis as a music performer, I think you'll really dig her performance in this. And I'm a fan of hers as a music performer, as well as an actor. It
is pretty cool that happens in this movie, and it was so early.
So Strange Days, definitely check it out if you can. Those are our picks of the week: Anaconda and Strange Days. What?
Just strange picks for The Abyss. I don't know. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
They all make sense.
They're connected.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, let's keep moving on. Here's your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even chill.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shut?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
Man, there's a lot of ways I could have gone with this Murray moment, and some have more loose ends than others. So for this one, I'm just going to play it safe, and let's revisit Billy's time on the set of the Wes Anderson film, The Life Aquatic, with Steve Zissou. Now, I know heading out to sea is a little on the nose when we've been talking about The Abyss this entire episode, but whatever. Both films happen almost completely on the water, so it makes sense. If you've seen Life Aquatic, it's a pretty surrealist look at a documentarian captain's mission to hunt down the elusive, fable-like leopard shark that killed his friend. There's a lot more to the plot, but I'm just going to leave it at that for right now. Visually, Life Aquatic is surrealism mixed with a heightened sense of reality. Like, you're watching it and are very aware this is a movie, but it doesn't make it any less believable. There is some real-life inspiration behind the film, which stealthily, maybe subconsciously, makes us buy the story a little bit more. Not to mention the performances by everyone in the film are totally top-notch. And like The Abyss, the water elements to each film did pose some challenges. Many times, Wes Anderson had Billy and the entire crew shooting in the early morning when it's around 19 degrees outside off the coast of Italy. I got a bone chill so bad, Billy explained, that Angelica, Houston, came in and was rubbing my body, trying to keep my blood moving. The crew was covering my body with cashmere and all these different crazy things that they were getting from town. He went on to say that the chill ran so deep to his core that his bones were cold for months after shooting. The cold was always an issue, and not just the natural outdoor elements. Even in controlled shooting environments, this was a problem too. Billy said the first day he and some of the cast got in the water, it was so cold. He's wearing a bikini brief, if you remember in the movie, and it's around 54 degrees. They basically got out this fire hydrant, said Billy, and then we just went right in. Co-star Willem Dafoe remembers this just as vividly as Billy does. The first session in the water ran about 40 minutes, and then they came out of the water, and there was another shock waiting for Billy and the cast. They had this fireman's hose of hot water that they just poured all over us and then said, "Get back in." The next in-water session, the cast was able to stay in for 20 minutes instead of 40. We came out again, and they poured hot water on us again, and then they had to pour it on us for even longer, Billy continued. And then they got back in. The next session could only last about 10 minutes, but this time, when the cast got out, everyone kind of looked at each other, getting prepared for this hot water just to be doused with once again, and almost like in unison, just kind of shook their heads. We're not doing that again. So what then? They had these shots to finish. What were they going to do? Well, they had to figure out how to heat the water, and they did, but they didn't know how to heat the water without making bubbles. So then you go down in the water, and it's heated, and then there are all these bubbles around you, and then there's fog around you. Just nobody could see anything, Billy said. And eventually, they were able to find a guy who could heat the water without making bubbles, but I guess it just turned into quite a big fiasco. Despite being a somewhat tough shoot, it doesn't seem like Billy regrets saying yes to Wes Anderson, though I don't think he was the happiest about the conditions. However, despite the technical difficulties, Billy said he was so far away from Hollywood that it felt kind of like a vacation. I mean, sort of. A hard, arduous vacation. Of every interview I've seen with the cast, everyone concurs it felt like it was, there was a certain lightness on set. And similar to a vacation, some people forgot that they were working. I don't think anyone ever felt like they were on vacation in The Abyss, but the cast bonding, definitely did happen in the same way, and going through tough shooting conditions brought everybody together. I think that bond comes through on screen and is yet another reason why Life Aquatic and The Abyss both really draw you in and make you believe that all these people really have an intimate crew-like relationship. And adding to that feel, Billy was known to break into dance on the Life Aquatic set. Of course, singing and just general kind of clowning around. There's a couple videos out there random. If you go on a deep dive on the internet, you can find a video or two of this. There's a lot of sitting around, and the cast could pretty much depend on Billy to just liven up the mood. And even when the production wrapped during its time in Italy, Billy invited the whole local crew back to his trailer for a toast. He just seemed like he had a really good time on this shoot, despite being physically uncomfortable. And I don't know about you, but Billy's Steve Zissou, his character, I mean, it's not my favorite, my most favorite of his roles, but sometimes it feels like it's hard to tell where Steve Zissou starts and Bill Murray ends. And although a tough shoot, and with a guy known to be very particular like Billy, it's a testament to how much he believes in any Wes Anderson film. And the way that Wes Anderson depends on Billy to be able to talk to anyone, to make anyone feel at ease, Billy trusts that Wes knows exactly what he's doing and that any discomfort is going to pay off in the end. And I guess maybe the cast of The Abyss must have had some of that same trust in James Cameron too. I would hope so.
You know, it's wild. I adore Wes Anderson, but Life Aquatic is probably the one that took me the longest time to like really come around, like warm up to.
Really?
Yeah, the first time I watched it, I was like not down at all.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I just felt like I was just like watching like one nonsensical scene after another, but I still don't. It's still not one of my favorite Wes Anderson movies, but I've grown to like really appreciate it, and Bill Murray's performance in it.
I love his performance. There's no doubt about that, and it is a very out there film. But I feel like because it's so out there that I can almost. It's a very big willing suspension of disbelief because it is completely not reality based.
Well, thanks so much for that Murray moment.
Of course.
So we had just a quick final thought here on The Abyss, and we'll wrap things up. In 1989, when The Abyss came out, prior to The Abyss coming out, there were two studio-funded films about an underwater crew that deal with some sort of being or creature. One, the first one being Leviathan, which I feel like is like altogether like a halfway decent movie. Yeah. It's got a good cast. The second being Deep Star 6, which to me was like really kind of pretty arduous to sit through. I watched both of these movies in probably like a span of 2 or 3 days. And oddly, when I was a kid, I remember seeing Deep Star 6. I actually think I saw that in the theater. Like my aunt,
Really?
My aunt took me and my cousin, and I remember thinking it was like really scary. But man, when you pair it up next to Leviathan, and then when you pair it up next to The Abyss, it was a pretty hard watch for me, like this last go around. Yeah,
both of these movies are very clearly subpar to The Abyss. I really liked going back and revisiting them. I was more familiar with Leviathan, though it had been a little while. But it should be said that the reasons, I mean, one could speculate, I guess you could say, that the reasons Deep Star 6 and Leviathan came out or were made was when it was announced that James Cameron's new film, The Abyss, is coming out or going into production. Studios were like, so we gotta jump on this and get some type of monster movie flick going. Yeah. And so these two were just like cranked out. And it's not to say that there's not like Leviathan, there are a lot of elements to it that are fun or entertaining or good monster creature effects. I love Ernie Hudson in it. Yeah. I'm so glad he's in it. There are a lot of things that are lacking, and a lot of things that could be lacking in Deep Star 6 as well.
Yeah, and a lot of it's just like the relationship. Like you just don't feel like you get to know any of the crews in those movies like you do in The Abyss. And not only were those two movies, but Roger Corman got in on the action with a sort of like underwater abyss ripoff movie called Lords of the Deep, which I haven't even The reviews on that thing are just like awful. I can't. It's on Tubi, but I did not. That was the one underwater movie I did not watch prior to us recording this episode.
So it's just kind of funny that immediately, like, this is a, you could say that it is probably played into one of the reasons that The Abyss didn't do well. So these movies came out, were complete bombs, and then The Abyss's, like, production schedule was already running long, and then post-production was running at least a year overdue. And so when it came time, and Cameron's, still editing this movie,
right?
And executive comes in and is like, look, dude, you need to figure it out right now because these other movies have come out and they're crap, and we need to figure this out.
And this is back in the, you have to frame the time period of this. Like, this is back in the day when like Disney and Amazon didn't own like everything, and there was like multiple studios. Whenever like there'd be like whatever the high concept movie is for that year,
sure.
All the studios would be like, this is our version of that.
Yeah.
And you don't really see that anymore because there's only like 2 studios, and everything's like very like, no one wants to step on anybody's toes. It's all like, you have the month of May, we have the month of June type thing or whatever. But it's kind of wild that like all these movies came out, and it's kind of like a blur to me now. But when I go back, these movies came out before The Abyss, and so I could see how audiences were probably just like, oh, I'm sure this is going to be about as lackluster as the other 2 we've seen. And so it's a shame that The Abyss didn't come out of the gates running.
On top of that, it was marketed as a horror movie too, which is
very odd.
And it was like towards the end of the 80s, so it's like horror was not a genre that people were like clamoring to go see. And then you've got like underwater movies not doing well. Like this wasn't a good time.
It's kind of weird. I always feel like it's like Cameron has always had this thing with studios where they just like have no trust in him, and they're just like, yeah, this is gonna be like the biggest bomb ever, and then he always sort of like comes out victorious. Though with The Abyss, not so much. It wasn't really like a big hit. It wasn't a bomb, but it definitely, for Cameron blockbuster standards, it didn't really make the money that like a Terminator 2 or True Lies or Titanic made.
No, but those movies wouldn't be around if it weren't for the technology he created on The Abyss.
Very true.
And we highly, highly suggest you go back, watch The Abyss. If you can, watch the extended cut. But whatever you can get your hands on. But this movie most certainly deserves another viewing. If you've never seen it, oh man, you're in for a treat with this one. It's not, I don't think it alienates any type of audience. Like, you're not going to be scared. You're not going to be, I don't know, freaked out. I don't know. It's a great action story with a lot of heart to it. Yeah,
absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And one last thing about The Abyss, I just wanted to mention that it is available for streaming on HBO Go right now if you have that streaming service. Well, let's end it there. I hope you've enjoyed our
50th episode.
What? That's crazy. It's awesome. I love that we're doing this.
Congratulations, Justin.
Yeah, I love that we've been doing this for so long.
All right, so what do we have coming up next? What's 51? Episode 51.
Well, this is a movie, probably I would say like our most unknown film that we've done on the podcast, but I figured after 50 episodes, if you stuck with us, and we did a pretty famous movie for our 50th episode, we were thinking we should go like really more obscure for our next episode.
Real deep cut here.
Yeah, real deep cut. We're going to do 1982's Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains.
I can't wait for this one.
I'm super excited.
Me too.
This is this is not a movie that like I grew up with. This is a movie that I probably like, found out about maybe like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So this is very young Diane Lane.
Laura Dern.
Yeah, and just a really kind of gritty, fantastic, if you're into movies about bands, which I am very much so into.
Yeah.
And sort of like 80s weird new wave stuff. This will be right up your alley. If it's a movie that you've never heard of, maybe you can check it out before you hit up our episode on that.
Seek out a copy. We promise it's worth your time.
Absolutely. So that's what we got coming up next. We hope you've enjoyed the episode on The Abyss. It's certainly been a fun couple weeks researching this and getting into sort of the madness that is James Cameron. If you want to check out old episodes from us, you can check out our entire archive at our website at don'tpushpausepodcast.com. If you are listening to us on iTunes, Apple Music, if you feel it's deserved, please give us a high rating on there. Leave us a review. That always helps spread the word. Post about us on your social media. If you want to interact with us, you can contact us or see us on Instagram, Facebook, don'tpushpausepodcast.com. We're on Twitter as well. If you want to reach us directly, we always love hearing from people at don'tpushpausepodcast@gmail.com.
My phone number is... No, just kidding.
So, we have a contest going this week for The Abyss, where you can get, for the people that are, and there are people interested in this, I would be myself, you can get the whole 1989 Underwater Trilogy on VHS from us. We're giving it away, Leviathan, Deep Star 6, and The Abyss on VHS. So look for details on that on our social media. So until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Raber.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, guys.